In the world of emergency medicine, paramedics are trained to save lives. But they're never trained for the impossible choice. When two people are dying, and you can only save one. Rachel Morgan faced that choice 15 years ago at a highway accident. A young mother trapped in one vehicle, an elderly man in another, both critically injured, only enough time to save one. She chose the mother. The elderly man died before backup arrived. Rachel carried that decision for 15 years, telling herself she'd made the right call. Younger patient. Better chance of survival. It was the choice any paramedic would make. But what Rachel didn't know was that the man she left to die had been driving to the hospital that day for one reason: to meet his daughter for the first time in 20 years. The daughter Rachel saved. Now that daughter has just walked into Rachel's firehouse, applying for a job as a paramedic. And Rachel has to decide, does she tell her the truth about the choice she made that day? Or does she keep the secret that will destroy both of them? Before we begin, please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end, because this story will challenge everything you think you know about the value of a human life. Rachel Morgan had been a paramedic for 23 years. At 45 years old, she had seen everything the job could throw at you. Car accidents, heart attacks, overdoses, shootings, fires, drownings. She had pulled people back from the edge of death more times than she could count. She had also watched people die despite her best efforts, their lives slipping away in the back of an ambulance, or on blood-stained pavement. It was the nature of the job. You saved who you could, and mourned who you couldn't. But you kept going because the next call might be someone you could save. Rachel worked out of Fire Station 19 in downtown Seattle, leading a team of paramedics who respected her experience and trusted her judgment. She had trained dozens of young EMTs over the years, teaching them the technical skills and the emotional resilience needed to survive in emergency medicine. She had a reputation for being tough but fair, demanding excellence but understanding when the job got to be too much. Her colleagues knew she'd been doing this work for over 2 decades, but they knew almost nothing about her personal life. Rachel kept those walls firmly in place. She lived alone in a small apartment near the station, her life revolving around her work. She had been married once, briefly, in her 20s. Her ex-husband had complained that she cared more about strangers than about him, that she gave everything to her job and nothing to their relationship. He'd been right, though Rachel had never admitted it out loud. After the divorce, she'd stopped trying to build connections outside of work. It was easier that way. Less complicated. The truth was that Rachel had been running from something for 15 years. A decision she'd made at a highway accident that haunted her dreams and shaped every choice she'd made since. She told herself she'd done the right thing, that any paramedic would have made the same call. But late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, she wondered if that was true or just a lie she told herself to keep functioning. The memory of that day was burned into her consciousness with the clarity of trauma. March 7, 15 years ago. A multi-vehicle collision on Interstate 5 during morning rush hour. Black ice had turned the highway into chaos. When Rachel's ambulance arrived on scene, she'd found carnage. At least a dozen vehicles involved, twisted metal and shattered glass spread across 3 lanes. Other emergency vehicles were still minutes away, delayed by the same traffic that had caused the pileup. Rachel had done a quick triage, assessing which patients needed immediate attention. Most had minor injuries, shock, cuts, bruises, but 2 patients were critical, both trapped in their vehicles, both bleeding out. Vehicle 1 was a blue Honda Civic, crushed on the driver's side. Inside was a young woman, maybe 25, unconscious, with obvious head trauma, and a steering column pinning her chest. Her wedding ring caught the morning light. In the back seat, Rachel could see a car seat, empty but present, a reminder that this woman was someone's mother. Vehicle 2 was a silver Toyota Camry, T-boned on the passenger side. The driver was an elderly man, maybe 70, conscious but fading, with crush injuries to his chest and abdomen. Blood was spreading across his shirt. He was trying to say something, his lips moving, but Rachel couldn't hear him over the chaos of the scene. She had perhaps 2 minutes to make a decision before both patients would be beyond saving. Her training kicked in automatically: assess, prioritize, act. The young woman had a pulse, weak but present, better airway, younger, stronger physiologically, higher likelihood of survival with immediate intervention. The elderly man's injuries were more severe, internal bleeding that would require surgery. Even with immediate transport, his chances were poor. Rachel made her choice. She went to the young woman first. She used the jaws of life to pry open the Civic's door, carefully extracted the woman from the wreckage, stabilized her neck, controlled the bleeding from a deep laceration on her scalp. She worked with the focused intensity that came from years of training, blocking out everything else. By the time she had the young woman secured and ready for transport, 6 minutes had passed. Backup ambulances were arriving. Rachel turned back to the silver Camry. The elderly man was no longer moving. His eyes were open but unseeing. Rachel checked for a pulse and found nothing. She started CPR anyway, compressions hard enough to crack ribs, but she knew it was too late. He'd been gone for at least 3 minutes. The brain damage, if they even got him back, would be catastrophic. Another paramedic, her partner Tom, took over compressions while Rachel returned to the young woman. They transported her to Harborview Medical Center where trauma surgeons saved her life. She'd spent 2 weeks in ICU, another month in recovery, but she'd survived. She'd gone home to her husband and her 2-year-old daughter. The elderly man was pronounced dead at the scene. John Harrison, age 72, retired school teacher, widower, father of 1 daughter he hadn't seen in 20 years. Rachel had learned these details later when she'd looked up the incident report, trying to process what had happened. She'd made the right choice. The young woman had a family, a child who needed her mother. The elderly man had been alone. His injuries more severe. His prognosis poor even with immediate care. Any paramedic would have made the same decision. It was triage. It was protocol. It was the job. But Rachel had never stopped seeing his face. Those final moments when he'd been trying to say something to her, when he'd known he was dying and she'd turned away to save someone else. She'd never stopped wondering what he'd been trying to tell her, what last words had died with him on that highway. For 15 years Rachel had carried that moment with her. It informed every decision she made, every patient she treated, every impossible choice when resources were limited and people were dying. She'd become hyper-vigilant about triage, about making sure she didn't miss anyone, about saving everyone she possibly could. Her colleagues thought she was just dedicated, thorough, excellent at her job. They didn't know she was trying to atone for a choice that still felt like abandonment, no matter how many times she told herself it was the right call. The morning Emily Harrison walked into Fire Station 19 started like any other. Rachel was in her office, reviewing training schedules for the new class of EMT candidates who would be starting their paramedic rotations next month. She supervised the training program, responsible for evaluating which candidates had what it took to move from basic emergency medical services to advanced life support. It was a role she took seriously, knowing that the decisions she made would determine who got to save lives and who needed more training. Her assistant knocked on the door frame. "Captain Morgan, the new rotation candidates are here for their interviews. First one's ready when you are." Rachel nodded, pulling up the first application on her computer. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, serious eyes, a slight smile. The resume was impressive. Emily Harrison, age 32, EMT certification for 8 years, bachelor's degree in biology, volunteer work with Doctors Without Borders, excellent recommendations from her current supervisors. Rachel's finger froze over the mouse as she read the name again. Emily Harrison. The same last name as the elderly man who died on the highway 15 years ago. Coincidence, Rachel told herself. Harrison was a common name. Seattle was a big city, but something made her scroll down to the personal statement section of the application. "I'm applying to become a paramedic because I understand how precious life is, and how quickly it can be taken away. 15 years ago, I was in a serious car accident. A paramedic pulled me from my vehicle and saved my life. I was unconscious for most of it, but I was told later that the scene was chaotic, with multiple critical patients. The paramedic who saved me had to make difficult choices that day. Because of her choices, I survived. I got to watch my daughter grow up. I got to rebuild my life. I got to become someone who could help others the way I was helped. But I also learned something that day that I didn't discover until years later. My father died in that same accident. He was in another vehicle, trapped and injured, and he didn't make it. For years I was angry about that. I wondered why the paramedics didn't save him, why they let him die. But as I learned more about emergency medicine and triage, I came to understand the impossible choices that paramedics face. Resources are limited, time is limited. Sometimes you can only save one person when two are dying. The paramedic who saved me made a choice. She chose a young mother over an elderly man. She chose me over my father, and I'm applying for this program because I want to honor both of them, the paramedic who saved me and the father I never got to know. I want to be someone who makes those impossible choices with courage and compassion, knowing that every decision has weight, that every life matters, that we do the best we can in an imperfect world. Rachel stared at the screen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might explode from her chest. This couldn't be real, this couldn't be happening. But the details matched perfectly. The date of the accident, the description of the scene, the young mother who'd survived, the elderly father who'd died. Emily Harrison was the woman Rachel had saved 15 years ago, and she was applying to join Rachel's program apparently without knowing that Rachel was the paramedic who'd pulled her from that crushed Honda Civic, the paramedic who'd chosen to save her instead of her father. Rachel's hands were shaking as she closed the application. She needed to think. She needed to figure out what to do with this information. Should she recuse herself from Emily's evaluation? Should she tell Emily the truth? Should she pretend she didn't know? Let Emily move through the program, hope the connection never became clear. Before she could decide, her assistant appeared in the doorway again. Captain Morgan, Miss Harrison is ready for her interview. Should I send her in? Rachel took a deep breath and forced herself to nod. Yes, send her in. She stood up behind her desk, trying to compose herself, trying to look professional and calm when inside she was falling apart. The young woman who walked through the door was not the unconscious, bleeding patient Rachel remembered from the accident. This Emily Harrison was confident and poised, dressed in business casual clothes, her handshake firm when she greeted Rachel. Captain Morgan, it's an honor to meet you. I've heard incredible things about your training program. Rachel gestured to the chair across from her desk. Please, sit. And call me Rachel. They sat down, and Rachel found herself staring at Emily's face, looking for echoes of the elderly man who died that day. She could see them now, the shape of the eyes, the line of the jaw. This was John Harrison's daughter. The daughter he'd been driving to see when the accident happened. The daughter he'd been estranged from. The daughter he'd apparently been trying to reconcile with before he died. I read your personal statement, Rachel said carefully. You mentioned being in a serious accident 15 years ago. Emily nodded, her expression becoming more serious. Yes, it changed my entire life. Not just surviving it but what I learned about it afterward. What did you learn? Emily took a breath, clearly weighing how much to share in a job interview. I learned that my father was trying to reach out to me that day. We'd been estranged for years after my parents' divorce. I was angry at him. Blamed him for things that weren't entirely his fault. He'd been trying to reconnect. Sending letters I wouldn't read. Making calls I wouldn't answer. That morning he was driving to the hospital where I was recovering from the accident. He wanted to see me. To be there for me. But he never made it. I'm sorry, Rachel said. And she meant it with every fiber of her being. That must have been incredibly difficult to process. It took years, Emily admitted. For a long time, I was angry at everyone. Angry at my father for dying before we could reconcile. Angry at the paramedics for not saving him. Angry at myself for being so stubborn that I wasted the time we had. But eventually, I realized that anger wasn't helping anyone. So I channeled it into something productive. I became an EMT. I started helping people the way I was helped. And now, I want to take the next step. Rachel looked down at the application again, buying herself time to think. Emily was clearly qualified. Her technical skills were excellent. Her recommendations glowing. Her motivation genuine and powerful. Under normal circumstances, Rachel would have accepted her into the program without hesitation. But these weren't normal circumstances. How could Rachel train this woman? Work alongside her? Mentor her? Knowing what she knew? How could she look Emily in the eye every day, carrying the secret that she was the one who'd made that choice? Who'd left Emily's father to die? Emily, Rachel said slowly. I need to ask you something. If you learned the identity of the paramedic who was at your accident, who made the decision to save you, how would you feel about working with that person? Emily looked surprised by the question, but she considered it carefully. I've thought about that a lot, actually. For years, I wanted to find that paramedic and thank her. I wanted to tell her that her choice mattered, that I've tried to live a life worthy of being saved, but I've also accepted that I might never know who she was. The incident reports didn't name individual responders, and the emergency services records are confidential. If I did meet her, I think I'd be grateful. I'd want her to know that she made the right choice, even though it cost me my father, because I got to raise my daughter, and she's the most important thing in my world. My dad would have understood that. Rachel felt tears threatening and forced them back. And if working with that person brought back difficult memories, if it complicated your ability to do the job, I don't think it would. Emily said with quiet confidence. I've processed my grief and my anger. I understand triage now. I understand that sometimes you can only save one person when two are dying, and paramedics have to make those choices in seconds without perfect information. I don't blame the paramedic who saved me. I honor her decision by trying to be someone who makes similar choices with the same courage. Rachel sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by Emily's words. This woman had spent 15 years coming to terms with her father's death, transforming her anger into purpose, her grief into service. She had forgiven the paramedic who'd let her father die without even knowing who that paramedic was. And now that paramedic was sitting across from her, holding her future in trembling hands. Your application is very strong, Rachel said, returning to professional ground. I'll review it with the selection committee, and we'll let you know our decision within 2 weeks. Emily stood and shook Rachel's hand again. Thank you for your time, Captain Morgan. Whatever the decision, I appreciate you considering me. After Emily left, Rachel sat alone in her office for a long time, staring at the application on her screen. She had 2 weeks to decide what to do. She could accept Emily into the program and keep the secret, training her without ever revealing the connection between them. She could reject Emily's application, some excuse about too many qualified candidates, protecting herself but denying Emily an opportunity she deserved. Or she could tell Emily the truth, and let her decide whether she still wanted to work with the woman who'd chosen to let her father die. None of the options felt right. All of them felt like betrayal in different ways. That evening, Rachel did something she rarely did. She called her ex-husband, Mark. They'd stayed friendly over the years, checking in occasionally, maintaining a distant cordiality. Mark was one of the few people who knew about Rachel's struggles with that accident 15 years ago, who'd watched her deteriorate in the aftermath, who'd tried to help her process the trauma before eventually giving up and leaving. Rachel, Mark answered, surprised. Is everything okay? I need to talk to someone, Rachel said. And you're the only person who might understand. She told him about Emily's application, about the personal statement, about the interview. She told him about the impossible situation she now found herself in. Mark listened without interrupting, the way he'd always been good at listening before their marriage fell apart. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? He asked. I don't know, Rachel admitted. I've spent 15 years convincing myself I made the right choice, but now I'm faced with the consequences of that choice in a way I never expected. How do I train her? How do I look at her every day knowing I'm the reason her father died? Rachel, you saved her life. That's not nothing. I know. But I also abandoned her father. I left him to die while I saved her. What if I'd made a different choice? What if I'd tried to save them both? What if there was something I missed? Some way I could have gotten to him faster. You're a good paramedic, Mark said gently. One of the best I've ever known. You made the choice you thought was right in an impossible situation. You don't get to replay that moment with the benefit of hindsight and better circumstances. But she's here now, his daughter, and she's asking me to train her, to mentor her, to help her become someone who makes the same impossible choices I made. How am I supposed to do that while carrying this secret? Maybe you don't, Mark said. Maybe you tell her the truth, and if she hates me for it, if it destroys her, then you deal with that consequence too. But Rachel, you can't keep running from this. You've been running for 15 years. Maybe it's time to stop. After they hung up, Rachel pulled up Emily's application again, and read through the entire file. Every detail, every recommendation, every piece of her story. Emily Harrison had built a life from the wreckage of that accident. She'd raised her daughter, become an EMT, volunteered in crisis zones, dedicated herself to saving lives. She'd transformed her trauma into purpose, her grief into service. She deserved to become a paramedic. She deserved the opportunity to fulfill the potential that Rachel's choice had given her, and she deserved the truth. The next morning, Rachel called Emily and asked her to come back to the station. "There's something we need to discuss before I can finalize your application," Rachel said. "It's important, personal." Emily arrived an hour later, looking concerned. Rachel led her not to her office, but to the station's quiet room, a small space where they brought families to deliver bad news, where privacy and difficult conversations were protected. "Emily, before I say anything else, I want you to know that your application is strong. You're qualified for this program, and under normal circumstances, I would accept you without hesitation. But," Emily prompted. Rachel took a deep breath. "But there's something you need to know, something that might change how you feel about training here, about working with me." She told Emily everything, about arriving at the accident scene 15 years ago, about the 2 critical patients and the impossible choice, about choosing to save the young mother because she was younger, had better chances, had a child who needed her, about leaving the elderly man, about watching him die while she transported Emily to the hospital, about carrying that choice for 15 years, wondering if she'd made the right decision, wondering what John Harrison had been trying to say in those final moments. "Emily, I'm the paramedic who saved you," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "And I'm the paramedic who let your father die. I made a choice that day that gave you your life back, but cost you the chance to reconcile with him. I've lived with that choice for 15 years, and now you're here, asking me to train you, and I don't know if I have the right to do that while keeping this secret." Emily sat perfectly still, processing this revelation. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, recognition, confusion, something that might have been anger or grief or both. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, Emily spoke. "You're her. You're the one. Yes. You chose me over my father. Yes." More silence. Rachel waited, prepared for anger, for accusations, for Emily to walk out and never come back. She deserved all of it. But when Emily spoke again, her voice was surprisingly steady. "Can you tell me about him, about those final moments? What happened after I was pulled from my car?" Rachel nodded, grateful for the chance to give Emily something, even if it was just details about her father's death. "He was conscious when I first assessed him. His injuries were severe, internal bleeding, crush injuries to his chest. I knew he didn't have much time. He was trying to talk, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear him over the chaos. I made the decision to go to you first because your injuries seemed more survivable. By the time I came back to him, he was gone." "What do you think he was trying to say?" Emily asked quietly. "I've wondered that for 15 years, Rachel admitted. "I've played that moment over and over in my mind, trying to read his lips, trying to understand. Based on what you've told me about him driving to see you, I think he was trying to tell me about you, trying to make sure someone knew he had a daughter, that someone would tell you he'd been trying to reach you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He died thinking about me. I believe so. And Emily, I need you to know that if I could go back to that moment with the knowledge I have now, I don't know if I'd make a different choice. I saved a young mother who had a 2-year-old daughter waiting for her at home. I saved someone who had decades of life ahead of her. That's what triage is. That's what this job demands. We make impossible choices with imperfect information, and we live with the consequences." "I know," Emily said, wiping her eyes. "I've studied triage. I understand the principles. Younger patients with better prognoses get priority when resources are limited. You did what you were trained to do. But that doesn't make it easier," Rachel said. "It doesn't make it feel less like abandonment. I've carried your father's death with me every day since then. It's shaped everything about how I do this job." Emily looked at Rachel for a long moment, and Rachel saw her making some kind of decision, processing layers of emotion and information, coming to terms with a truth she'd been seeking for years. "Captain Morgan, Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." Rachel nodded, bracing herself. "You gave me my life back that day," Emily said. "You chose me when you could have chosen my father. And yes, that choice cost me the chance to reconcile with him. It cost me the possibility of knowing him as an adult, of introducing him to his granddaughter, of healing the rift between us. Those losses are real, and I've grieved them. But here's what else is true. Because you saved me, I got to raise my daughter. Her name is Sophia, and she's 17 now. She's smart and kind and everything good in this world. She exists because you pulled me from that car. She gets to have a mother because you made the choice you made. My father, if he knew all of this, if he knew he died so that I could live and raise my daughter, I think he would have wanted that. I think he would have made the same choice you did." Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. 15 years of guilt and grief finally finding release. "Are you sure about that?" "I'm sure," Emily said firmly. "Because that's what parents do. They choose their children's lives over their own. My father was driving to see me that day, because he loved me, even after years of estrangement. If he'd been conscious, if he'd understood the situation, I believe he would have told you to save me first. He would have wanted me to live." The two women sat in the quiet room, both crying, both processing the weight of what had been revealed. After a while, Emily spoke again. "Can I ask you something? Anything?" Rachel said. "Why did you tell me? You could have kept this secret. I would never have known. Why risk it?" Rachel thought about that question, about all the reasons she'd almost decided to stay silent, about the fear that had kept her running for 15 years. "Because you deserve the truth," Rachel said finally. "Because secrets have weight, and I've been carrying this one for too long. And because if you're going to train under me, if you're going to learn from me, you need to know who I really am. You need to know that I'm not perfect, that I make mistakes, that I carry the weight of every person I couldn't save. That's what this job is. It's not about being a hero. It's about doing the best you can with impossible choices, and living with the consequences." Emily nodded slowly. "Does this mean you'll accept me into the program? Do you still want to join after everything I've told you?" "More than ever," Emily said. "Because now I know I'll be learning from someone who understands the real cost of this work. Someone who doesn't take those choices lightly. Someone who has lived with the weight of deciding who lives and who dies." Rachel felt something shift inside her chest, a weight she'd been carrying for 15 years beginning to lift, not disappearing entirely, that would never happen, but becoming manageable in a way it hadn't been before. "Then yes," Rachel said. "Welcome to the program." They sat together for a while longer, talking about what the training would involve, about the difficult calls Emily would face, about how they would navigate the complicated dynamic of their relationship. Before Emily left, she asked one more question. "Rachel, can I tell you something about my father? Something I learned after he died that I think you should know." Of course, when the police went through his belongings, they found a letter in his car. It was addressed to me, probably written the night before the accident. He was planning to give it to me at the hospital. It said he was proud of me, that he regretted the years we'd lost, that he understood why I was angry, and he didn't blame me for it. It said he wanted to be part of my life again, and his granddaughter's life, if I would let him. Emily pulled a folded piece of paper from her bag. "I've carried a copy of this letter for 15 years. It's helped me process his death, helped me forgive both of us for the time we wasted. I want you to read it." Rachel took the letter with shaking hands, and read her father's words, written the night before he died. Words about love and regret, about pride and hope, about wanting one more chance to be the father he should have been. When she finished, she understood something she hadn't before. John Harrison had been on his way to reconciliation when he died. He'd been driving toward hope, toward healing, toward a future where he might know his daughter and granddaughter again. And in his final moments, when Rachel had looked at him and made her impossible choice, he'd probably been trying to tell her about that hope, trying to make sure someone knew he loved his daughter, even if he didn't survive to tell her himself. "Thank you for showing me this," Rachel said, handing the letter back. "He loved you very much." "I know," Emily said, "and I think in some way he'd be glad you saved me. He'd understand why you made the choice you did, because that's what you do when you love someone. You want them to live, even if you can't." Over the following months, Rachel trained Emily to be a paramedic. It was one of the hardest and most rewarding experiences of Rachel's career. Emily was an exceptional student, quick to learn, empathetic with patients, cool under pressure. But more than that, working with Emily helped Rachel finally come to terms with the choice she'd made 15 years ago. They responded to calls together, and Rachel watched Emily face her own impossible choices. A car accident with multiple casualties, and limited resources. A house fire with victims trapped on different floors. An overdose situation with several patients, and only one dose of naloxone. Each time, Emily made her decisions with the same careful assessment Rachel had taught her. Young versus old, severity of injuries, likelihood of survival. The cold calculus of triage that saved lives but carried enormous emotional weight. And each time, after the call was over, they would debrief. Rachel would ask Emily how she was processing the choices she'd made, how she was coping with the patients she couldn't save. Emily always gave the same answer. I did the best I could with what I had. That's all any of us can do. 6 months into Emily's training, they responded to a call that brought everything full circle. Multi-vehicle accident on the interstate. Multiple critical patients, limited resources, backup delayed. Rachel and Emily arrived on scene together. And for a moment, Rachel froze. This was it. The same type of call. The same impossible situation. But this time she wasn't alone. Emily moved with confidence, assessing patients, prioritizing, making the hard calls. Rachel watched her save a teenage boy, while an elderly woman died waiting for backup. She watched Emily make the same choice Rachel had made 15 years ago. The same choice any good paramedic would make. After the call, back at the station, Rachel found Emily in the equipment bay, cleaning gear with shaking hands. Rachel sat down next to her. First time making that kind of choice. Yeah, Emily said quietly. I knew it would be hard, but knowing intellectually and actually living it are different things. You made the right call, Rachel assured her. The boy had better chances. His injuries were more survivable. You did everything correctly. I know, Emily said, but that doesn't make it easier. That woman had a family. She mattered, and I chose someone else over her. Rachel put her hand on Emily's shoulder. That's the weight we carry. Every paramedic who's ever made that choice carries it. But Emily, you saved that boy. He gets to go home to his family because of you. That matters too. Emily looked at Rachel with tears in her eyes. How do you live with it? How do you keep doing this job knowing you can't save everyone? You focus on the ones you did save, Rachel said. You honor them by being the best paramedic you can be. You transform your grief into purpose, your guilt into service. You do exactly what you've been doing. You turn tragedy into meaning. Is that what you've done? Emily asked. I'm trying, Rachel admitted. With your help I'm learning how. They sat together in the quiet of the station. Two women bound by an impossible choice made 15 years ago. Both carrying the weight of decisions that saved some lives and cost others. But they weren't carrying it alone anymore. A year after Emily joined the program, Rachel attended her graduation ceremony. Emily stood on stage receiving her advanced paramedic certification, and Rachel felt a pride she hadn't experienced in years. This woman, whose life she'd saved and whose father she'd let die, had become one of the finest paramedics Rachel had ever trained. After the ceremony, Emily introduced Rachel to her daughter Sophia. The girl was 18 now, about to start college. With her mother's determined eyes and her grandfather's gentle smile. Mom's told me about you, Sophia said, shaking Rachel's hand. She said you saved her life. She's being generous, Rachel replied. Your mother saved herself. I just gave her the chance. She also told me about my grandfather, Sophia continued. About the choice you had to make. I want you to know that I'm grateful you chose my mom. I know it cost you a lot, and I know my grandfather died because of it. But I get to have a mother because of you. That's not nothing. Rachel looked at this young woman, at the life that existed because of an impossible choice made in seconds 15 years ago, and she finally understood what Emily had been trying to tell her all along. The choice had weight. It would always have weight, but it also had meaning. Your grandfather was trying to reconcile with your mother when he died, Rachel told Sophia. He loved her very much. He was driving to see her, to be part of her life again. I think if he'd known that his death meant you would have your mother, he would have made the same choice I did. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Thank you for telling me that. It helps to know he cared, even though I never met him. As Rachel watched Emily and Sophia embrace, she felt the last pieces of her 15-year burden finally lift. She had made an impossible choice. She had saved one life and failed to save another. She had carried that weight for 15 years. Punishing herself for not being able to do the impossible. But Emily had shown her another way. She had shown Rachel that the choice had created something beautiful, that the life Rachel saved had meaning and purpose, that John Harrison's death hadn't been in vain because his daughter and granddaughter lived and thrived. Rachel would never forget that day on the highway. She would never stop seeing John Harrison's face, never stop wondering what he'd been trying to say in those final moments. But now she could honor his memory by training his daughter, by helping Emily become someone who made the same impossible choices with courage and compassion, by making sure that the life Rachel saved that day would go on to save countless others. Dear viewers, sometimes we face choices that have no good answer. Rachel Morgan had to decide who would live and who would die with imperfect information and seconds to act. She made the choice that training and experience told her was right, but she carried the weight of that choice for 15 years. Convinced she'd failed the man she couldn't save. Emily Harrison taught Rachel that impossible choices can have meaning beyond our understanding, that saving one life creates ripples we might never see, that the weight we carry can be transformed into purpose if we let ourselves be forgiven. This story reminds us that everyone who makes life and death decisions, paramedics, doctors, soldiers, police officers, carries weight we can't imagine. They make choices in seconds that we can analyze for years. They save who they can and mourn who they can't. And they keep showing up, keep making those impossible choices, keep carrying that weight, because the alternative is letting everyone die. Rachel learned that forgiveness sometimes comes from unexpected places, that the people we think we've failed might understand our choices better than we understand them ourselves, that living with impossible decisions means accepting that we did the best we could with what we had, even when our best wasn't enough to save everyone. Emily learned that anger and grief can be transformed into purpose, that honoring the dead means living fully, serving others, becoming someone who makes difficult choices with courage, that sometimes the best way to heal from loss is to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. What impossible choice are you carrying? What decision haunts you because you couldn't save everyone, couldn't fix everything, couldn't be perfect when perfection was required? Rachel and Emily would tell you that carrying that weight doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. What matters is what you do with it. Do you let it crush you, or do you transform it into purpose? Do you run from it for 15 years, or do you face it when the truth demands to be told? Do you hide from the people you think you've failed, or do you give them the chance to offer forgiveness you didn't know you needed? Sometimes the lives we save create legacies we never see. Sometimes the choices we make in crisis ripple forward in ways we can't predict. Sometimes the weight we carry alone becomes lighter when we finally share it with the people who understand. Rachel Morgan made an impossible choice 15 years ago. She saved one life and failed to save another. She carried that weight until the daughter of the man who died showed her that weight can be shared, that grief can become purpose, that impossible choices can have meaning even when they break our hearts. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, if you're carrying the weight of an impossible choice, you're not alone. We all make decisions we can't take back. What matters is what we do next. What matters is whether we let those choices destroy us or transform us. What matters is whether we keep showing up, keep trying, keep believing that even our flawed and imperfect efforts to save each other matter. Because they do. Every single one of them matters.